now that are particularly well suited or tailored to your technologies. Because each technology, there are advantages, disadvantages. But let's talk a little bit about the types of clients that you have today and what kinds of deployments those tend to look like. Let's, for a geography purpose, keep it simple. Let's look at here in the U.S. So if you can start off with Ingenu, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So Ingenu got its start as on-ramp wireless 8 years ago. The technology, random phase multiple access, was developed from the ground up, purpose-built for machine communications. So we're not talking about high-speed data, we're not talking about voice technologies. Low-power, wide-area technologies to serve the growing billions of devices that are going to be enabled with this technology. Today we have 38 private networks using RPMA globally. We got our start in the industrial IoT space in the utility area. So today we've got a number of utilities around the world, but we're just going to focus here in the US. San Diego Gas and Electric was one of our first customers. They've covered all of San Diego County with our RPMA technology to monitor the assets of that electric grid. Switching over to oil and gas, we have a partner, Wellaware, that has deployed over 50,000 square miles of oil and shale basin throughout the United States, mainly Eagle Ford Shale Basin, the Permian Basin, and they're monitoring assets that are out on the different oil field wellheads, whether it's monitoring the pressure of the pipe casings, monitoring the fluids that they need to inject to keep the wells running, as well as monitoring all of the oil, gas, and water that they're pulling out of the earth. Those are two examples. More into a smart city environment. The city of Riverside, California is currently monitoring all their overhead electrical grids with a fault circuit indicator. So now the city and government and utility there is much more intelligent when they have an outage. They know precisely where that outage has occurred. If a palm frond or something has fallen on that line, they now are more intelligent and can roll a truck and restore power to the city in a much more efficient fashion without the use of IoT technology.
Great, thanks. Dave?
Sure. So we have a few different key application developments that are going on and deployments that are going on that I think highlight some of the critical features and functions of the LPWA network. So certainly, I think for many of us, it's true that low data rate is one of the big characteristics of all of the applications. Very often that goes together, maybe with the exception of some of the power grid applications, with a very low power consumption as being a driving factor. So we see kind of that kind of characterized. Specifically, we have an application that has been rolling out for the last 18 months that does heating fuel tank monitoring for residential heating fuel. We monitor propane and oil tanks. That's deployed throughout the United States, but specifically in 3 major regions: in the Northeast, in the Midwest, specifically St. Louis area, Ohio area, and then throughout California as well. In addition to that, we see some very interesting applications that require bidirectional communication, the ability to not just pull data out from a sensor, but also then to take action on the basis of that. So that requires 2 things. One of them is that you need to have understand the timeliness of the data, be able to reach back and actuate that device in a reasonably short period of time. We see that in many of the metering industries as a requirement coming on stronger and stronger. The other one that's very interesting that we see taking off over the course maybe in the next year more strongly than it is right now is around asset tracking. So being able to track devices as they move. Today for us in the LPWAN areas within geographical regions, so not nationwide, but within areas, for example, within the Northeast region or the California region, as devices are moving from, in many cases, from production to consumption in those areas. We see that a lot in agriculture, livestock, food-related industries, as well as in asset management and construction sites and ports and things like that as well. So being able to communicate with those devices and report back to locations through that is a very important application for us.
Sure.
We have globally about 1 million points, which in this world of major cell coverage carriers, that may not sound like a lot, but in satellite, that's a pretty big number. In the U.S. alone, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how many we have. The primary markets we serve, transportation is by far and large the biggest. Over-the-road trucks, construction machinery, that type of thing. Probably the next biggest area for us is in energy. Oil and gas, I mean, let's face it, it occurs where there isn't infrastructure, and that's where we come in. So we sometimes provide backhaul for private radio networks installed on those oil and gas operations. Many times it's just direct satellite on the meters, production meters, pipelines, you name it. A lot. Artificial lift is, if you're familiar, the way they help get the oil and gas out of the ground is one of our biggest areas. We have a number of applications in the maritime space, tracking cargo containers, both onshore and offshore. So we really operate without limits. We're kind of like wireless on steroids.
Great.
And we're working with a number of different applications, a lot of them have been mentioned here on the supply chain, agriculture, metering, smart city. We're on the chip side at Semtech, so we're dealing with a very wide spectrum of applications. But if you look at what's going to guarantee the ROI of these low power wide area networks, I think it's going to be in the asset tracking and supply chain space. I think that's where the highest volume will be long term, and I think where LoRa has one of the key advantages. It was mentioned on the panel earlier with the analysts about tracking packages, and that's something that we're already doing trials with some of the major postal companies. It's getting devices low cost enough and disposable so that you can put them on packages.
I'm just going to tell a joke now because we covered all the areas. But the kind of use cases you find tend to vary based on the maturity of the deployment. So when you look at places like Spain, Italy, France, Ireland, where we have 95% pop coverage, you tend to have a mix of consumer and industrial enterprise settings. So you typically start with the industrial enterprise, like the asset tracking, like agriculture. Then when you get the higher penetration, you start to get some of the things we've done, like the million units with Securitas as the fail-safe backup to home security systems, or connecting 1 million smoke detectors and offering smoke detection as a service. And now like you can turn everything into a service, of course, with connectivity, mainly because the battery performance and the price point. So I think strong, consistent, but I think the answer changes based on the network maturity.
Right. So with the types of segments and clients that you've mentioned so far, oil and gas, agriculture, heating and oil monitoring, a lot of these things are in areas where currently mobile network operators don't have coverage. But they're in the process of also going through a technology evolution so that in the next year or two they may be able to provide some things, not quite at the cost level that you're talking about, but there will be at least some competition. But I was curious from a business strategy standpoint, are you, with each of your companies, are you focused on building coverage where mobile network or network operators currently are, where they're currently not, a little bit of both? Do you see one as being a higher, longer-term strategy, benefit to your company? Feel free, whoever wants to jump in.
I think the unique opportunity with RPMA and our technology is the unparalleled range and coverage that we get from deploying one site. So I can achieve 200 square miles of coverage by deploying one site. So I could be at the edge of where cellular exists, or I could partner with Chuck and just use satellite as my backhaul and go to where the coverage is needed. So our initial strategy is to go where the majority of the population in the U.S. is. So today we've launched 5 markets, mainly 4 in Texas, all the major cities, Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, as well as Phoenix. And our plan is to launch 30 markets this year, and then by the end of 2017, have a ubiquitous RPMA footprint. And we're able to do that very economically with, again, achieving 200 square miles of coverage from a single site allows us to really drive price points down in terms of the service offering that we're bringing to the market.
So predominantly metropolitan areas at this point.
Today, Andy, but we're going to go where our customers need coverage.
Okay.
So if that is out into smart agriculture, and we'll look to different solutions to get that backhaul out
Right.
to where we need to go.
Okay.
Andy, I would suggest that our deployment is to ask the question about how the traditional cellular deployment influences us. It's like asking someone who sells skateboards if they deploy their stores differently than where Mercedes dealerships are. It's really a different customer, a different use case that we're addressing. So about half the times we deploy, we're partnered up with a different connectivity. And so you use us to get the majority of the benefits, the majority of the time, you might default back to the fat pipe just as few times you need it. But to us, it's really not considered in our deployment. It's really about the customer demand and an entirely different market that, for the most part, is unaddressed by conventional technologies.
Right, okay.
I would go and say I agree with some of the things that have been said there. I don't know if we should get into the war of who's got more coverage there, but at the end of the day, we see that the applications have to drive the deployment model. So building networks, particularly in the United States or North America generally, I think it's a bit different than it was in Europe as the European networks began to be deployed, because the amount of geographical area that needs to be covered really can't be done before the applications are there. You have to kind of work in lockstep with the application development in order to bring the networks up just in time, as it were, for the application to be deployed. And that's what our strategy is. What do we see happening as a result of that? We see definitely that the areas where most of the applications are interesting in the early development stages are in the suburban and the rural areas. In many cases, that's on the fringe of where cell phone coverage really is. Not to say that urban deployments aren't going to be very important as well, but there certainly feels like there's a little bit more resistance to the application cutover in those areas.
I think you really need I think you really need both technologies. I mean, I don't really view what anybody's here doing on the panel as really truly competing to cellular. I think they're different applications, they're different use cases that are going to drive the demand and the usage of a certain technology. I don't view, low power wide area networks or even the satellite. I think they're targeting, purely different applications than what cellular or even narrowband IoT is going to target.
Right.
What we do, and the reason I'm here, how about that? Scary. What we do is augment networks like these guys, okay? There's going to be places, it's a logical choice for them to deploy where density exists, where need exists. That makes total sense. But there's going to be a lot of applications where reliability is needed, where monitoring and control is needed. Oil and gas has been doing this for a long time, again, using private radio. The problem with that installation is you have to build towers. It's a line of sight technology, and the end devices are expensive. Okay, this is going to change that world. It's going to change it for the better. And companies like mine, I win the coverage game, okay, but I don't win the cost game. So I need these guys. I need these guys to be able to then proliferate coverage in those remote areas with unbelievable coverage and low power, low cost devices. That's something that the remote world has been screaming for a long time. And not the least of which is important is the line of sight issues they've been dealing with, and they are frustrated by that. So the oil and gas communities, the environmental community, a lot of environmental monitoring we do around the world, these guys are really anxious to see your networks, all these guys' networks get deployed, and sometimes they're going to need backhaul for us to help them get that out there.
One of the things that I'm curious about is you begin to build out these networks and provide good coverage. That's obviously opening up a whole new set of companies and applications that can take advantage of your technologies. But that also starts to create demand for greater diversity of actual end devices. And so I was curious to get your thoughts as to how it is that you're focused on building up your portfolio of devices to try and satisfy this broader selection of potential clients.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Just as important as building the coverage and capacity that's needed for all these IoT solutions, we need ecosystem partners to do that. So what we're doing at Ingenu is reaching out to that ecosystem of partnerships, and we've announced Compal, a Taiwanese-based organization, will be developing radio nodes, a line of RPMA radio products. We'll have a few more announcements with some other well-known module makers that we're broadening and creating that broader ecosystem to get more into the mainstream IoT solutions outside of just the industrial IoT where we've kind of grown up with the technology.
Yeah, we've been doing a very similar thing for about 18 months or so now, and working with both technology partners, so working with companies that are making radio modules, making full-on system and designs that are willing to OEM them. Those are all critical elements of getting an ecosystem built up. But then also going out and working inside of the incubator and the hardware accelerator communities and making sure that the technology is distributed and brought to those environments so that you can get full access to all of the innovation that's going on in the economy right now. And that's something that we've been focused on for the last 6 months or so, in bringing development kits and training and things like that into these areas, and working with other partners who are doing the same thing. So we have a relationship we've been working with Orange, Silicon Valley, doing that in the San Francisco area, seeding startups who are building IoT kinds of devices to be able to leverage this technology.
In our case, we, I get really excited when I hear the things like we heard this morning, sub $10 levels and sub $5 level in devices. In my case, not so much. My devices run from the hundreds to the, maybe 1,000 or so. What we've been doing and what we're continue to do is take the cost out of those devices, get them down to modules. We see sub $100 devices, but a lot of what we do too is to make it simple, make it easy to use, make it nondescript, because people tamper with things that they think are important for whatever reason. And just take the complexity out of satellite. That's been a limiter for us for a very long time. By getting down to modules, we want to have products that can be embedded into equipment and that type of thing, and sold just like other boards. So,
I agree, ecosystem is key, and that's why we set up the LoRa Alliance. We have hundreds of companies develop end products and also modules. That's also why we also license the technology to other semiconductor manufacturers. So we also have the other semis supporting developers to create new applications so that you can scale up to the volume that you need to create ROI in these networks.
No?
Yeah, so we're trying to take cost and complexity out of every level, which is why we have so much diversity on the chip level, module level. Yeah, there's many choices, but the philosophy is let everybody do an ecosystem what they're good at. So you can go online, you can see hundreds of people on our hardware catalog today at every level of the stack in hardware. So we think that helps drive, just like low-cost connectivity drives adoption, really, not so much stealing from 3G, but really just unserved markets. We think the same thing has to happen on the hardware ecosystem for that effect to really hit its scale.
Right. Well, so for a number of the organizations, if we shift the perspective away from the U.S. to international markets, Hardy, you were talking about Orange, SKT, and a few others, really thinking about a true national deployment. So essentially building the coverage to enable future deals to come onto that network. But in the U.S., for a variety of reasons, most of your companies have actually decided to build almost on demand to some extent. Ingenu has started to change that up a little bit in recent times to build out more metropolitan areas. But I was kind of curious to get your thoughts on that strategy and how that changes going forward. With the costs being so low to actually build out network coverage in a particular area, is it even worthwhile looking at a true national footprint at this point for the U.S. or for countries with similar types of geographies?
So our strategy is we're going to build out the U.S. and be the network operator of RPMA here in the United States, the machine network. We've chosen to license the technology outside of the U.S. So today we have licensees covering 48 countries that are today building out RPMA networks. So in Italy, South Africa, Asia, networks are being deployed and built today. This is in addition to the 38 private networks that I spoke about earlier that are using our technology in a private fashion. You're talking about taking the cost out of something, making it real easy to deploy. RPMA is deployed in universal spectrum. So that's one spectrum globally. So for the ecosystem, build one product, sell it globally. What's easier than that?
So I think it has to be different strategies for different areas around the world. Back to the question about how you do deployments. I think as a startup, looking for funding on a reoccurring basis and thinking about how those networks get built and how you do the cost justification to your investors, be that as a startup or as a public company and the funds that you're taking in there. It's very difficult to do the cost justification in an area as large as the U.S. to go do a comprehensive build out and wait to see what happens. You need to have a projection of when the revenue is going to hit and how is that going to pay for what's going on. So to me, it doesn't feel like it's a feasible kind of strategy. What we've seen, even with many of the other telcos who are operating is they are very willing to do large-scale trial deployments, kind of in multiple cities, to see how the applications get developed, but to not kind of jump in and say the whole U.S. is going to be done. I frankly feel that the same thing is going to be driven with even the 3GPP-based solutions as they cut over, which is they'll be cut over kind of on demand and as the natural life cycle progression will go, as opposed to a switch being flipped that everything now is one shape. Just because there are real investments that have to be made, and you need to have a ROI on that investment in today's business world.
Well, and as a quick point of reference, I don't know that these are the latest figures, but in the last couple of years, CTIA has put out some statistics basically saying that in the U.S. we have 99+% coverage for population, right? But in terms of true geographic coverage, it's like the high 70s in terms of percent, because there are areas that are just so vast that with the typical cellular coverage and cost justification for building out sites, there's plenty that just doesn't justify that type of investment, given the current networks and ideas that you're talking about.
So that's my favorite line is when someone asks me when I'm going to have national coverage, is I'm going to have it right as soon as I have national cell phone coverage.
Right.
So from Inmarsat's perspective, and this is to steal a marketing tagline, we're already there. Unless you're deploying at the north or the south pole, we're the most reliable cellular, most reliable wireless option you can get. So that's really not much of an issue for us.
I think from LoRa perspective, for the U.S. market, you're maybe going to have a few who are going to deploy the network. You know, Senate is getting exceptional coverage today, but maybe there will be others who will roll out into other target different verticals that will have coverage in different areas, and they will have roaming agreements to be interoperable between them.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about roaming agreements. It's the network's built from the ground up to be seamless. In that respect, it's part of the value proposition, which is why we're announcing million-unit connection deals, because people want to be able to blast over geographies. But the U.S. is a big place. It will take time to cover. Under the best of situations, and even though demand is incredibly strong, it's a big place. And it's just going to take time. So we all have to decide how to prioritize that work.
Well, with everybody here on the panel, you've got operations here in the U.S. and many with operations internationally. How much of the demand, Alan, are you looking at from clients that want to scatter across all versus those that are really much more focused on their individuals? Can you give us a ballpark as to what that looks like?
You know, it's higher than I expected because if you look at how global manufacturing is, where you make a set of SKUs and not be able to ship them anywhere. It's not so much things are like everything is roaming everywhere, but you want to be able to ship things a lot of places without worrying about the billing and settlements and what are you going to pay here, and, all those kind of things. And so it's highly desirable, even if they don't use it as much as they think. It's extremely desirable to just do one technology and double the whole thing. So from that perspective, it attracts a lot of interest.
And in terms of the types of deployments, are you looking at deployments that are increasingly sort of focused on massive millions, or are we still, because Alan, you were talking about $1 million plus, how much of that is sort of your typical versus more point deployments for companies that are just interested in their own customer?
Well, a few things start like that. Nobody comes in and says, I'll buy it. Well, actually, some people do, but typically you go through a trial stage. And we're just as happy to have the 50,000 unit deals as we are the 1 million unit deals. But the point is that when you have operations in so many countries with the same technology, and you have the big ecosystem behind it, you get scale, which drives cost down. Because there's so many options, and that's really the mantra that even if you don't think you're going to ship it everywhere, when you have just such scale across the system, that's what's going to get the cost down really low single-digit dollars for your E-BOM, which is really where we're at right now.
Right. Anybody else want to talk about sort of the general size of deals or the types of requests that you're getting? Is it different today than it was 2 years ago?
I think that there is a difference. And back to kind of the original question about what the characteristics are of the vertical, if you will, that drives a requirement for a national deployment. All solution providers want a national deployment. There's no question about that. The question is there a path for them to walk with you towards that? And the vast majority of the the industrial, if you will, IoT cases, the enterprise industrial IoT cases, the answer is yes, they're willing to go do that with you. They know that they can't deploy everywhere. They know they're going to have a strategy that has to roll out as well, and they're willing to do that with you. The exception to that is consumer-based solutions. So consumer-based devices and products, they do need ubiquitous national, at least, coverage in order for those devices really to come to the fore. And I think that's why we see in these areas that there's been more of a focus on the enterprise side initially as we go out and go do that. And I think that there has been a change over the last 12 months as the enterprise solution providers have come to realize that that is a very feasible way of going and building out solutions for their companies, for their customers.
And as a group of companies, initially in many instances, the deployments were really looking at almost a sort of a collection gateway of local devices, popping things back to the network. But as we move on, individual modules are going to have to give way to integrated design much more frequently. How are you working with clients to try to integrate your technologies, chipsets, what have you, into their existing products or future products? Is there a design collaboration process that your companies have at the moment or are contemplating going forward?
We have a few things. Certainly we have an application engineering team that staff to work with our partners in embedding the radio module and putting that on a board, doing that design. So we have development kits. We call it our Rackham board. It's a REST interface on the back end to pull that data down. And prior to getting coverage out, I mean, it takes time to do a national deployment or even a local market deployment. We have what we call our exploration kit, where we're going to take our access point and we'll ship it to a partner that they can create their own local coverage. So with that local coverage and the development boards, they can start building their solutions and designing their solutions today.
Yeah, so I'll second that. So we announced about a month ago our IoT Foundry, which is a process where we'll work with a solution provider to integrate the technology kind of at whatever level makes sense for their production scale. In these environments, there's the right time to kind of take an OEM product and rebadge it. There's the right time to take a radio module design and leverage that. There's the right time to do a chip down design as well. So I know others will do this as well, but we offer that as a solution where we'll help them make that decision and then help them implement those designs as well. The chip down designs are not terribly difficult to do. We can absolutely help people go do that. There are some additional regulatory costs associated with doing that need to be kept in mind. But there's very much a path towards that. And in a similar fashion, we offer development kits as well, where you can get gateways and devices through our partnerships with other members of the ecosystem. Instantiate those in your development lab. They will connect directly to our production network. They'll expand the production network slightly. And you can leverage the full-on production capabilities through the developer portals that we have to implement and stream data back into your API. So it makes it very, as simple as it can be is what the goal is, really, to get those devices to commercialization and brought there.
In our case, we're taking our terminals. We own and operate the satellite network. We own the birds in the sky. We don't build equipment. All the manufacturers work with us. We're working to get them down to chipsets and modules. That's the desire of our customer base. It's not quite as simple in our game because there are antenna issues and very important things that you have to take care of. So it's a little slower for us, but that is the same direction we're heading. In answer to your question, are we working with particular industries and companies? Yes. Some I'm not at liberty to announce who they are, but we do work with them, and they are looking at tracking construction machinery, over-the-road vehicles, that kind of thing. But they want to be able to integrate these things into their commonly used equipment and not have it a separate satellite piece of equipment.
Artie, can you talk a little bit about this process more broadly as the LoRa Alliance? Because you're sort of representing a large group of companies here today, so I was kind of curious from that perspective.
Sure. So in the Alliance, we're doing certification through the Alliance. So we have lots of modules such as Multitech or Microchip who are certified modules and make it very easy to do integration. To expand a little bit on what Dave said, I think if you're less than 100,000 units per year, it makes sense from a cost perspective to use a module. Once you start to go above that, it maybe makes sense to start looking,
Right.
doing your own chip design. I think a lot of companies we see are being supported by the module companies to do their prototypes or their first developments, and that's the easy way to get stuff on the market quickly.
Alan, you guys have a broad set of end devices. Talk a little bit about how Sigfox works with those companies to make those things come to reality.
Sure, it's a similar process where we have a whole variety of dev kits, access points, everything, all the little widgets that people need to get started. But frankly, to just hand your customer a bunch of this stuff, or even your partner, it's sort of like saying, all the pieces for your house at home or at Home Depot, all you have to do is put it together. Have fun. So it's not really the fastest way to get scale on your network always. So what we try to do is we'll provide a certain level of coaching, try to understand what they need, and then say, okay, here's some possible partners in these different areas. But frankly, part of the ecosystem build is having a network of SI partners that are RF experts, or that are, that's probably one of the bigger things you see out there is that you've got really good like designers of the package, except for the RF. And they just aren't trained in RF. And so you sort of have to bring up the speed on the RF side, perhaps, understand how things like metal work and antennas. And it's, just some of those disciplines that we take for granted don't exist. So that's really, that coaching role, try to make it efficient for all parties. But you tend to think of it about it in terms of a customer problem, and it is, but it's just as much an end device creator issue, because LPWAN's a new technology for them as well.
But it's interesting because this actually echoes a lot of the things that we're seeing in our enterprise surveys. A couple of things. One is when we ask about trusted partners that enterprises are interested in working with to develop an IoT solution. Inevitably, you're looking at end-to-end solution providers, but systems integrators are always number one, which is a little bit frustrating, to be quite honest, because they're essentially the middleman that will go to Home Depot and put everything together, whether it's the ideal solution or not, right?
They're the GC, the general contractor.
That's right.
And guess what? They're going to be in a bigger and bigger control point, in my opinion, over the next 5 years. Because there's so many pieces you look at all through the stack from low to high, this is the most complex thing to get started. So they're going to be in a stronger and stronger position.
And the other thing we're starting to see much more traction for there's not even a decent phrase for them. I've asked these companies and they can't describe themselves, but they're essentially a hands-on design house. And so these are companies like Fjord or Frog, Argus Designs, Universal Mind, Ubiquity. These are companies that sort of come in, help establish a strategy, but then also build together. Now, they're not, they don't bring the general tech as you guys do, but it's an interesting combo because they sort of help satisfy that architect versus GC sort of scenario, right? For keeping that metaphor alive.
Yeah, they're good guys. The only thing I would add is I work with a number of those guys, and I love those guys, but they tend to be more consumer than enterprise oriented.
Yes.
And so they're really good when you're thinking about in terms of the UX.
Right.
How do you make, that was the magic of the Kindle, right? The book just showed up and was included in the cost. That was the real magic of the Kindle, that it abstracted the enabling technology to the point of magic.
Right.
And we're nowhere near that in this business. And I think the people who figure that out faster will scale faster.
I think a lot of the big consulting companies are addressing the industrial side, the Accentures, the Deloittes, the Cognizants. They're working, I think, with a lot of the industrial customers on integrating into these type of solutions.
Absolutely. And please.
Yeah, just one quick, I think there's still an interesting opportunity though in the startup space for innovation and disruption as it comes to bringing simplicity to what is observed as a complex process right now. And frankly, in my opinion, the SIs further complicate that. And they add additional cost levels on top of that, where there's an opportunity if you can take the first leap, and we see many startups that we're working with who are doing this, to understand the technology pieces and go bring that together as a turnkey solution ultimately. There's a real interesting opportunity for many of them in that space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that in many situations, systems integrator is not so much a turnkey solution as a long-term babysitter, right? You just never want to give up control. And so I think that's a challenge for a lot of companies when they start to work with systems integrators. Okay, so we've got a couple minutes left. Very quickly, so if we think about coming back to this panel a year from now, what do you anticipate to be able to tell the audience in 2017 the change that existed from July 2016 to that date? If you can sort of give us a brief future view.
I would say a much, much larger footprint of RPMA. We'll have, this time next year, I would say we'd have 3/4 of the country covered with RPMA technology. I know that's we're zigging when the rest of the panel is zagging and they're waiting for the applications. We don't need to wait for the applications to be here, and that's because of the unparalleled coverage that the technology affords us to do. So not just here in the U.S., but kind of like the old board game Risk, we're filling in the countries with RPMA partners, and we're going to see close to 100 countries covered with RPMA by this time next year.
Crystal balls are always difficult, but so we definitely see that we're going to have competitors with LoRaWAN technology in the U.S. by that point in time, and as I think as was mentioned, we expect that will drive up the level of coverage ultimately within the U.S. and in North America faster and faster as time goes by. As initially there's pockets of effectively collaboration that go on in that space. We fully believe that there will be dozens of vertical industry solutions that will be up and running on the network at that point in time. And we expect to see the continued cost compression that's going on, both in terms of the network infrastructure side, but also in terms of the end device design side as well. So I think there's some very interesting cost transitions that will be occurring in the next 6 to 12 months, 12 months in this space. And if this is my last chance to say 1,000 square miles instead of 200.
Well, this is actually a great time for us at Inmarsat with OP-WAN, and why that is, all of these guys may compete for customers, but I will be able to serve every one of them, okay, in those remote areas where they need it. So it's a good time for me. But in general,
You're everybody's friend.
I'm everybody's friend. I don't want to upset any of you. But it also, just a general comment about IoT, it greatly arouses the awareness of the importance of monitoring and control, okay? And that drives customers to all of us, so that's why it's good for us.
You know, I think there is somewhat of a race for coverage in building the capital that's needed to get that coverage, but I think it's more of a race of ROI. You know, who's going to secure the most customers and the most volume on the network to drive a good ROI and be able to scale that globally is a real question.
I think for us, first of all, we continue to see market demand running ahead of network build-out. So frankly, it's not a demand issue for us. So I think in the next year, you'll see a couple $100 million more dollars in the bank on top of the $150 we already had. I think, though, as the cost continues to drop and the battery continues to get above where we're at now, which is 12 to 15 years, depending on the use case, I think it's going to actually enable business models that we never imagined. Or I think it's going to get to the point soon where people will start giving away hardware to enable a services model, to enable data capture. I mean, the costs are getting that low in LPWAN. So I think that's what's going to be really fantastic in the industry.
And I'd like to open it up to the audience for some questions. So if we can start with you, please.
Yeah, just a couple questions. So, Chuck, from a satellite perspective, it's Skyview, right? And so if you guys could talk about the technologies in building, out of building, and also this is called something about fixed. We talked about fixed and mobile. And are there any in-building applications now, or sub-training? So I'm thinking about transportation, trucks, and shipping. And when the guy goes into the 8th level garage, what happens then, and what kind of coverage would your networks have, or how that?
I'll give you your payment in a minute for asking that question, because I thank you greatly. These guys will enable us to go places we've not been. You're exactly right. For my technology to work, you have to see the bird. Okay, in other words, it has to have exposure to the sky. That makes it hard for me to deal with mining, anything sub-level, right? Basements. These guys will take me there. All right, and that's why I like it. They actually bring down my cost of end user devices if you look at it that way. So from a fixed versus mobile perspective, in my game, it's largely distorted in the favor of mobile assets that we track. but we do a lot of fixed high-value asset monitoring, and usually that's the higher bandwidth stuff, but I think that's going to change.
I think there are two kind of main advantages of LoRa. We can do a very low-cost gateway that's $50 or $100, and we can put that in the basement that's 8 levels below ground, where it's very difficult to reach from a tower. I think one of the other advantages of LoRa is there's no issue with speed. So you can put it on a truck, you can put it on an airplane. I think some of the other narrowband technologies have issues once you start to move at a appreciable speed. So I think that those are the two kind of key areas for LoRa where we can help to build out and get better coverage.
Sigfox and RPMA?
So RPMA today, we've got probably the industry-leading link budget in terms of propagating that signal. San Diego Gas and Electric today is achieving that, hitting underground bunkers that the electrical grid is monitoring. So they're using RPMA today to reach hard to reach places like that.
Yeah, and we're doing well in utilities, gas, electric, and water, simply because of ultra narrowband is really good penetration, especially in the lower spectrum we use, the 902 spectrum in the US and 868 there. So 8 stories deep, you just, again, similar to what LoRa does, you just put another little base station down.
Are they seeing in Europe some in building?
Quite a bit. If you look at, and back to my comment about the maturity of what drives the type of use cases, once you hit a tipping point of coverage, you tend to go very quickly to about 50% consumer, 50% industrial enterprise. So about 50% of our deployments in Europe right now are consumers because the indoor coverage is so good with ultra narrowband.
I would say about a quarter of our total installations are below ground.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. I think unfortunately we've got to wrap that up and move on to our next panel. But if I could ask everybody to give a nice round of applause.